spending the night on the battlefield. So he's still haunted in broad daylight, and pained in broad daylight at his memories of the night fighting on May 2nd. Not just the scenes, but also the smells of that night. And then another time, as he spends the night, after arriving in Spotsylvania, Mackintosh admits that his coffee kept him awake, and he said, I think I fought all the battles over again several times before I got back to sleep. So it's even keeping him up at night, this experience of riding back through. I know he blames the coffee, but I bet if he was refighting all of his battles, there was a little more than the coffee. And so you see in a lot of his writings that Mackintosh is glad to visit the battlefields, that he's finding an outlet in his memories by being able to write the book, his long account, not only of his visit, but also of his experiences on the battle. But as he's writing, he writes not only details of the battle, but also multiple character sketches of his comrades, the people he fought with. Makes you ask why. Does it help him to relieve the weight of his memory? Does he realize just how much he actually remembers and how much he needs to share? How much he wants to keep the stories alive, especially of those comrades who are fallen and now gone. And his writings might be the best memory of them for the years to come. So I think in these different individual accounts, we get a glimpse of what it means to each of these people to visit the battlefields. How did they cope with the post-war experience? How did they understand their wartime experience when they're actually on the place that it happened? How do they process it? How do they make meanings of it? But there are also a lot of group visits, and there's a lot of good reasons for people to come back as a group. The typical visit, and here actually we have the 114th Pennsylvania with the monument that they placed on the Chancellorsville battlefield. We have one of the best group pictures from our fields. But you see a typical visit of these large groups coming to prompt the veterans to write down details of the battle. And a lot of them are sending their actions back to local newspapers. They're talking about reunions and the placement of monument dedications and all of that. It revives memories of the battles from their visits and a renewed dedication to keeping that memory alive. So much of the same things that we've seen in these individual visits. And you see a compulsion to share battle scenes and stories. There's one such well-documented visit that I'll only share a snippet of. It's the 14th Connecticut reunion trip to Fredericksburg in 1891. And to me this is interesting because it shows a little bit of the interaction between these Union veterans and the Southern civilians. Because you might think in a town like Fredericksburg, which although now is kind of Northern Virginia, right? At the time it's very much Southern, it's very much Virginia. And you see that sometimes, but you also see a lot of great hospitality from even the former Confederates. So we've always been a welcoming place in Fredericksburg, I like to think. But you can judge from this headline in 1891, the morning that the 14th Connecticut arrives in Fredericksburg, the headline reads, "The Yanks again with us. Old Union veterans visit the places they helped to bathe in blood." So not always. But with that said, the 14th Connecticut is escorted by former Confederates, by Southern citizens. And actually, that frequently the Confederate veterans would go to the Exchange Hotel and sit on the porch or sit on the stoop and trade stories with their former adversaries. So you see reunion happening again in maybe yet another way. On an individual basis, it's a lot easier, right? You're not going to look another man in the eye and tell them, well, sometimes you will, what you actually think of them. But I think these men are able to find more common ground when they're visiting sites where they had a shared experience. And you see that in these group reunions and in the response of Fredericksburg citizens. But we're going to see a few more snapshots. This time we're going to shift our focus a little bit to monumentation. So here we have some veterans around the Jackson Rock. So how many of you have been to Chancellorsville and seen the Jackson Rock? Good number of you, okay. So this is actually one of the first monuments placed in our park is to Stonewall Jackson, where he was wounded at Chancellorsville, or approximately where he was wounded at Chancellorsville. It's this very large stone. You can actually only barely see it. It's right here. The veterans have all covered it up. Now I'm going to read a long list of names of who's in this photo, because I know for some of you this will ring a bell. If it doesn't, by all means, not that important. But in the front row, you see from left to right, Simple Private. It's a really interesting thought as to how he might have gotten into this photo, because he's Private Warren Forster. He's the one standing on the left. Then we have James Power Smith, Jackson staff officers. Joseph Dickinson, one of Hooker's staff officers. James H. Stein, and Vespasian Chancellor of the Chancellor family of Chancellorsville. In the back row, from left to right, we have Hillary Herbert, Confederate colonel, John C. Robinson, Union officer, Roy Stone, another Union officer, William S. Rosecrans, Gilbert Niffen, James Longstreet, and Henry Hunt. So including some officers who did not fight in the Battle of Chancellorsville, you'll notice. So it's a large gathering of veterans right here, and actually very prominent ones. But they're surrounding this excellent, one of our earliest monuments, and it's really one of the most visited sites in the entire park. And interestingly about this monument, we might think from this picture and the placement of it that it would be a lot of sentiment and beauty surrounding this place and this monument. But in our descriptions, we see that people have interacted with it a little bit differently through the years. One newspaper correspondent wrote, "It stands 3 feet 8 inches high and is 2 feet 10 inches in breadth. Its surface shows dents and scars whereupon loving pilgrims have scaled bits of it as relics, and all around are smaller pieces of hard rock that have been used as hammers with which to crack it. So don't just visit Chancellorsville, visit